The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as Asher Vaughn moved around with practiced ease, flipping pancakes while his son, Milo, sat at the table, kicking his tiny feet against the chair. A soft chuckle left Asher's lips as he turned to glance at his husband, Damian Caldwell, who was scrolling through his tablet, sipping his coffee. The morning felt peaceful, like any other day in their home.
Papa, look.
I made a bunny with my syrup. Milo beamed, his small hands sticky as he showed Asher his creation. Asher smiled, ruffling his son's messy curls. That looks amazing, baby. He turned toward Damian, waiting for a reaction, but his husband barely lifted his head. Damian, isn't it cute? Damian hummed, barely glancing over.
Yeah.
Looks great, kid. The warmth in Asher's chest dimmed slightly, but he pushed the feeling aside. Maybe Damian was just distracted by work again. That evening, Damian surprised him with a bouquet of white roses and a dinner reservation at one of their favorite restaurants. It had been so long since they had gone on a proper date, and Asher felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things weren't as distant as he feared. Over candlelight, they talked, laughed, and reminisced about their younger years, how they had met, their first kiss, their wedding day. Asher held on to those moments, wishing they could last forever. You still look breathtaking, Damian murmured, taking Asher's hand across the table. I don't say it enough, but I appreciate everything you do for our family. Asher blushed, warmth spreading through him. That means a lot, Damian. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, cherished. But as Damian's phone buzzed and he turned it over quickly without answering, a faint unease settled in Asher's gut. The next few weeks passed with Damian growing increasingly busy. His company had taken on a massive project, and his boss, Elliot Graves, was keeping him late at the office almost every night. Just a few more weeks, babe, Damian said one night as he packed his suitcase. Once this deal is done, we'll take that vacation you've been asking for. Asher nodded, forcing a smile. I understand. Just don't work too hard, okay? Damian kissed him quickly, already distracted. I won't. Asher watched him leave, the words feeling empty. That night, he curled up in bed alone, Milo nestled against him, and wondered when the distance between them had started growing. Days turned into weeks, and the neglect became impossible to ignore. Damian barely called while on his business trip, and when he did, his tone was always clipped, impatient. Asher poured all his energy into Milo, trying not to let the loneliness eat away at him. But it was hard. So damn hard. One afternoon, Asher's best friend, Victoria Hale, stopped by for coffee. You look exhausted, she noted, concern evident in her sharp gaze. Asher sighed, rubbing his temples. It's just Damian. He's always working. Always too tired. I don't know, Vic. Maybe I'm overthinking. Victoria tapped her fingers against the table. Or maybe you're not. Have you considered that he might be hiding something? The thought made Asher's stomach turn.
No.
Damian loved him. Didn't he? Asher started noticing little things. Damian's cologne lingering on his shirts, but mixed with a scent that wasn't his. His husband being extra protective of his phone, excusing himself for calls late at night. And then there were the business trips, always with Elliot. One evening, Milo was watching cartoons when Asher's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You deserve better. Attached was a blurry picture. Damian, sitting too close to Elliot at a bar, their hands touching in a way that wasn't professional. Asher's breath caught. His hands trembled as he stared at the image, disbelief warring with the gut-wrenching truth. Damian was cheating on him. Asher spent the next few days in a fog, trying to pretend everything was normal. But the image wouldn't leave his mind. He needed proof, real, undeniable proof. So, he did something he never thought he would do. He hired a private investigator. It only took a week for the confirmation to come in. Photos. Videos. Damian and Elliot, checking into a hotel together. Laughing over private dinners. Kissing in the back seat of a car. Asher sat at the kitchen table, staring at the evidence, his heart shattering into pieces. The man he loved, the father of his child, had been betraying him for months. When Damian walked through the door that evening, acting as if nothing had changed, Asher looked up with cold, unreadable eyes. "We need to talk," he said, voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Damian frowned. "What about?" Asher slid the envelope across the table. "About the lies you've been feeding me for months." The war had just begun. Silence stretched between them as Damian stared at the envelope on the table. His fingers twitched, hesitation clear in his posture. Asher folded his arms, his sharp gaze never leaving his husband's face. Damian scoffed, pushing the envelope away without even opening it. "What is this? Some dramatic stunt?" Asher's jaw clenched. "Open it." With an exasperated sigh, Damian flipped it open, pulling out the neatly stacked photos. As his eyes moved across the images, him and Elliot entering a hotel, the lingering touches, the undeniable kiss, his face paled. He sucked in a sharp breath, nostrils flaring. This isn't what you think," Damian stammered, shoving the photos aside. "Elliot and we were just drunk. Don't lie to me." Asher's voice cracked like a whip, anger and heartbreak entwined. "How long, Damian? How long have you been sneaking around behind my back?" Damian hesitated, his lips parting, but no excuse came. The answer was written in his silence. "Months." Asher's voice was barely a whisper. "Years." Damian finally met his gaze. "Since Milo was born." Asher flinched, a sharp pain slicing through his chest. The very moment he had needed Damian the most, when he had been at his most vulnerable, his husband had already been betraying him. "Get out," Asher said, his voice trembling. Damian laughed bitterly. "This is my house too, Asher. You don't get to kick me out just because you're emotional." Asher took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Then I'll leave. But don't think for a second that I'm going to let you win." And with that, he turned on his heel, walking away before Damian could see the tears spilling down his face. Asher sat in Victoria's living room, his fingers curled around a steaming cup of tea. She watched him closely, her sharp, calculating mind already working on the next steps. "I have a lawyer," she said simply. "One of the best in the city. We'll fight him, Asher." Asher sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't even know where to start. He's the one with the high-paying job, the expensive lawyers. I'm just—" "You're not just anything," Victoria interrupted firmly. "You're a devoted father, a damn good man, and you're going to fight for your son. He won't take Milo from you." A lump formed in Asher's throat. "I don't want to put Milo through this. But you don't have a choice. Damian will fight dirty. You have to be prepared for anything." Asher exhaled shakily, nodding. "Then let's do this." The courtroom was cold, sterile, filled with a low murmur of voices. Damian sat on the other side of the room, looking polished and composed in his expensive suit, Elliot beside him, whispering in his ear. Asher's stomach churned at the sight, but he kept his face neutral. He had to be strong for Milo. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "We are here to determine the custody arrangement for Milo Von Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, you may present your case." Damian's lawyer stood, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, my client is a financially stable, well-respected professional who has provided a secure environment for his son. On the other hand, Mr. Vaughn has been unemployed for years and lacks the means to support a child independently." Asher's lawyer, Marcus Ellison, stood immediately. "Your Honor, Mr. Vaughn has been the primary caregiver since Milo's birth. His dedication and sacrifices should not be dismissed simply because he prioritized raising his son over a corporate career." Damian's gaze hardened, and for the first time, Asher saw something cruel in his eyes. He had underestimated how far Damian was willing to go. The battle was only beginning. Damian's lawyer wasted no time in attacking Asher's parenting. "Your Honor, we have testimonies stating that Mr. Vaughn has been emotionally unstable since his pregnancy. There are concerns about his ability to provide a stable home." Asher's fists clenched, nails digging into his palms. How dare they use his past struggles against him? Marcus stood, calm but firm. "Your Honor, postpartum struggles are not a weakness. They are a reality for many parents, and Mr. Vaughn still ensured Milo had a loving and stable home. Damian smirked slightly, leaning back in his chair. Maybe if he took care of himself, he wouldn't have fallen apart after giving birth. A sharp silence followed. Asher turned to look at him, his vision blurring with fury. "You belittled me for years," he said quietly. "Made me feel like I was never enough. But you were the one who failed this family, Damian." Damian scoffed. "Please, Asher. No one else would even look at you after what pregnancy did to your body." Victoria gasped beside him, and Marcus immediately objected, but Asher barely heard them. His hands shook, but not with sadness, with anger. Damian had always been like this, hadn't he? And Asher had been too blinded by love to see it. The trial dragged on for weeks. Damian's team dug up everything they could to paint Asher as an unfit parent, but Asher stood his ground. He provided evidence of Damian's neglect, the emotional abuse, the infidelity. The hardest moment came when the judge asked Milo where he wanted to live. The little boy looked between his parents, eyes filled with uncertainty. Finally, he reached for Asher's hand. "I want to stay with Papa." Damian's jaw tightened, his fingers clenching into fists. Asher squeezed Milo's tiny hand, his heart breaking and healing all at once. The final ruling came on a rainy afternoon. Asher stood with Marcus and Victoria, his hands clammy, his stomach twisting. The judge looked over the papers before speaking. "The court grants primary custody of Milo Vaughn Caldwell to Asher Vaughn, with supervised visitation for Damian Caldwell." Asher let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was over. He had won. Damian stormed past him outside the courtroom, his face thunderous. "You think you've won? You're nothing without me, Asher." Asher met his gaze without fear. "I was always something, Damian. You just refused to see it." With Milo's small hand in his, he turned away from the ruins of his past, stepping into a future that belonged to him and his son, without the weight of a love that had long since turned to ash. The moment they stepped outside the courthouse, a cold wind whipped through the air, chilling Asher to the bone. But it wasn't the weather that sent a shiver down his spine, it was the feeling of Damian's lingering presence. He could feel his ex-husband's burning gaze boring into his back like a curse that refused to let go. Victoria placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she murmured, her voice filled with pride. "You won." Asher let out a shaky breath, clutching Milo's tiny hand. "It doesn't feel like a victory." His son looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Are we going home now?" "Home." The place Damian had turned into a battlefield. The walls that had heard too many arguments, the floors that had absorbed his tears. No, they weren't going back there. That house wasn't a home anymore. "We're going somewhere new," Asher told him gently, ruffling his son's curls. "A fresh start." But before they could take another step, Damian's voice sliced through the air like a jagged blade. "You think this is over, Asher?" Asher turned slowly, locking eyes with the man he had once loved. Damian's face was a storm of rage, his hands clenched into fists. Elliot stood beside him, looking uncomfortable, but saying nothing. "This is over," Asher said firmly. The judge ruled. "Milo stays with me." Damian let out a bitter laugh. "You think you can just walk away with my son and play happy family?" His lips curled into a sneer. "You're still the same pathetic excuse for an alpha. No matter what the court says, you'll never be good enough." Milo flinched at his father's harsh tone, clutching Asher's coat. That was all it took for Asher's spine to straighten, for his heart to turn to steel. "I may not have been enough for you, Damian," he said, his voice calm but cutting, "but I am enough for Milo. And that's all that matters." Damian opened his mouth to argue, but Victoria stepped forward, her expression sharp. "Unless you want to end up with a restraining order, I suggest you walk away now." Damian's jaw clenched, his nostrils flaring, but in the end, he turned sharply on his heel and stormed away. Asher watched him go, exhaling heavily. It was truly over. Moving into a new apartment felt surreal. The space was smaller than the house they had shared with Damian, but it felt warm. It was a clean slate, free from the ghosts of a broken marriage. Milo ran around excitedly, exploring every corner, while Victoria helped Asher unpack. "It's not much, but it's home," she said with a satisfied nod. Asher smiled tiredly. "That's all we need." For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of peace. But peace never lasted long where Damian was concerned. 3 days after the move, Asher received a text from an unknown number. "Damian, you won the court case, but I'll make sure you regret this." Asher's stomach twisted, but he refused to let fear take hold. He had fought too hard to let Damian shake him now. Victoria, reading over his shoulder, scoffed. "Block him. He's just bitter." But deep down, Asher knew Damian wasn't the kind of man to just be bitter. He was the kind who acted on it. And that terrified him. It started subtly. Small inconveniences that could have been coincidences. A flat tire when he was already running late to pick Milo up from school. A bank alert about an unauthorized attempt to freeze his account. A sudden error on his apartment lease, threatening eviction. Asher knew better. These weren't coincidences. This was Damian. Victoria confirmed it after making a few calls. "His company has connections everywhere," she said grimly. "He's pulling strings to make your life hell." Asher felt fury bubble inside him. "That bastard is trying to ruin me." Victoria crossed her arms. "What are you going to do about it?" Asher clenched his jaw. "Fight back." The final straw came when Asher received a call from Milo's school. "We need you to come in," the principal said, her tone serious. His heart pounded as he rushed to the school, only to find Damian already there, standing beside the principal's desk with a smug expression. "What the hell is going on?" Asher demanded. Damian leaned back, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "There was an incident. Milo apparently pushed another student. The school has concerns about your parenting." Asher's blood turned to ice. "What are you trying to do, Damian?" The principal cleared her throat. "We just want to ensure Milo is in a stable environment." "He is in a stable environment," Asher interrupted. "This is nothing but a ploy." Damian scared. "It's called being a responsible parent. Something you obviously struggle with." Rage burned in Asher's veins, but he refused to give Damian the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. Instead, he took a deep breath and turned to the principal. "I will cooperate with whatever assessments you need," he said steadily. "Because I have nothing to hide." Damian's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected Asher to handle this so gracefully. And that made Asher smile. Because no matter what Damian threw at him, he would not break. Asher wasn't the same man who had once cried himself to sleep over Damian's words. He was stronger now. And he was going to prove it. He hired a private investigator, determined to find something, anything, that could expose Damian for the manipulative liar he was. What he found was worse than he had imagined. Late at night, Marcus called him. "Asher, you need to see this." The next morning, he sat in Marcus' office, staring at the damning evidence. A hidden child. Damian had a son, a secret one, from an affair years ago. The irony was almost laughable. The same man who had belittled Asher for his parenting had abandoned his own child. "This changes everything," Marcus said. "If we go public with this." "Do it," Asher said without hesitation. Damian had played dirty for long enough. Now it was his turn. The scandal hit the media like an earthquake. Within hours, Damian's name was plastered across headlines. High-profile Alpha executive hides secret child. Damian Caldwell, a double life exposed. His company released a statement distancing themselves. His reputation crumbled. And Asher? For the first time, he felt free. Damian called, his voice panicked. "You bastard! You ruined me!" Asher smiled, a weight lifting off his shoulders. "No, Damian. You did that to yourself." And with that, he hung up. Because he was done. The courtroom was silent, save for the final bang of the gavel. The words still echoed in Asher's ears. Sole custody granted to the petitioner, Asher Sterling. For the first time in years, he felt a weight lift from his chest, though the wounds Damian left were still raw and bleeding. He didn't look at his ex-husband, didn't care to see the fury twisting his face. It was over. He gathered Milo in his arms and pressed a kiss to his dark curls. "We did it, buddy," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. His son giggled, unaware of the gravity of the moment, but clung to his father's shirt like he always did. He was safe now. Outside the courthouse, Victoria and Marcus stood waiting. Victoria, ever the composed warrior, smirked as she stepped closer. "I told you we'd burn him to the ground." Asher exhaled, shaking his head. "It doesn't feel like a victory," he admitted. "It just feels empty." "That's grief talking," Marcus said, his hand warm on Asher's shoulder. "You didn't just lose a husband. You lost years of yourself. But now, you get to rebuild. However you want." Asher nodded, glancing at Milo. His son deserved a happy, stable home. And if Asher had to learn how to heal from the scars Damian left, he would. That night, Asher lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The mansion that once held laughter and warmth now felt like an abandoned shell. The silence was suffocating. 4 years, he had fought for Damian's love. Endured the neglect, the cruel words, the disgust in his eyes. All for what? A marriage that had already been dead long before he had the courage to bury it. A notification buzzed on his phone. A message from Victoria. "Let's get lunch tomorrow. No excuses. You need to start living again." Living. What did that even look like anymore? Asher glanced at the crib next to his bed. Milo's tiny hand peeked over the railing, his face peaceful in sleep. Asher smiled faintly. This was worth fighting for. And if he was going to rebuild, he'd start with the one thing Damian never cared for. Himself. The cafe smelled of roasted coffee beans and freshly baked pastries. Asher had agreed to lunch with Victoria only because she was relentless, but when he stepped inside, he immediately regretted it. People. Noise. Conversations. He wasn't ready for this. Then his eyes landed on Elias Monroe. He was seated at a corner booth, reading something on his tablet. Soft Omega scent. Warm brown eyes. A quiet kind of confidence. He glanced up, caught Asher staring, and offered a smile. Not too much, not too little. Just calm. "Asher," Victoria called, waving him over. He forced himself to move. "This is Elias," she said once they sat. "A friend of mine. I figured you'd get along." Asher shot her a glare, but Elias chuckled. "I know a setup when I see one, don't worry. I'm just here for my coffee." That put Asher at ease. They talked. Nothing heavy, just small things. Elias worked with children, specializing in those who had troubled home lives. Something about that made Asher pause. "So you help kids heal?" Elias nodded. "And their parents, when they're willing." Asher stirred his coffee. The warmth of the cup felt grounding. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this. The nightmares didn't stop. Some nights, Asher dreamed of Damian's voice. Cold, cruel, indifferent. "You were better before you got fat. Look at yourself. No wonder I can't touch you. You're lucky I even stayed this long." He woke up gasping, fingers clawing at his chest. It wasn't real. Not anymore. But it had been. Milo's small, sleepy voice snapped him out of it. "Daddy." Asher wiped his face before turning to his son. "Yeah, baby." Milo held up his favorite stuffed wolf. "Can you hold him?" "He's scared." Asher took the plushie and pressed a kiss to its head. "Nothing to be scared of, buddy. You're safe." Milo smiled, curling up against Asher's chest. "Then you're safe too, right?" Asher swallowed hard. One day he would believe that. Later that day, he met Elias for coffee again. "You're avoiding talking about yourself," Elias noted, stirring his tea. Asher sighed. "Because my past is a mess." Elias smiled softly. "Messy pasts make strong people." Asher almost laughed at that. Strong. He felt anything but. Then Elias added, "You fought for your son. That's strength." And for the first time in a long time, Asher felt Scene. Asher Sterling is an unfit parent, Damian's lawyer announced in court. The words hit Asher like a slap, but he remained still. He had expected this. Victoria's expression was sharp as a blade as she stood. Your Honor, we have evidence proving otherwise. In contrast, we have witness statements that Damian Sterling has been neglecting his parental duties while engaging in reckless behavior. The trial was brutal. Damian painted himself as the wronged party, while Asher had to relive every lie, every moment of verbal abuse. But then Asher took the stand. I gave him everything, he said, voice steady. Even after he stopped touching me. Even when he told me I was disgusting. I fought for him. For us. Until I realized I was the only one fighting. Silence. Damian's face twisted in anger, but he couldn't refute the truth. When the judge finally spoke, Asher held his breath. Sole custody is granted to Asher Sterling. It was over. He had won. Freedom felt strange. No more court dates. No more legal battles. No more Damian. But what now? Elias suggested a weekend trip. Just to clear your mind. So they went. Just Asher, Milo, and Elias. The cabin was quiet, surrounded by trees, with a lake nearby. The first night, Asher sat by the fire, staring into the flames. So much had changed. He was still healing, still unsure. But for the first time, the future didn't feel terrifying. Elias sat beside him. You okay? Asher exhaled. I think so. A beat of silence. Then Elias reached for his hand. Just a touch, nothing more. Asher let him. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel wrong. Time passed. Slowly. Gently. Asher focused on his son, on his own healing. The scars Damian left would never fully disappear, but they no longer defined him. Elias was patient. He never pushed, never demanded. Just stayed. One night, as they sat on Asher's porch, watching Milo chase fireflies, Elias spoke. I love you, Asher. Asher's breath caught. I know you're not ready, Elias continued. And that's okay. I'll wait. Asher swallowed hard. Love. Could he have that again? After everything? He turned, looking at Elias, really looking at him. The warmth in his gaze, the quiet strength. Maybe, just maybe, he could try. Asher stood by the window of his new home, a cup of coffee warming his hands. The sun spilled golden light over the backyard, where Milo played with a toy airplane, running in circles, his laughter echoing in the morning air. It had been a full year since the final court ruling. Since Asher had won his freedom, won his son's safety. A year since he had last seen Damian's cruel eyes, heard his poison-laced words. A year since he had decided to start over. At first, it had been overwhelming. Relearning how to live. How to be himself outside of the wreckage Damian had left behind. There were days when the ghosts of his past still whispered, nights when he woke up expecting to hear criticism instead of kindness. But every time those shadows crept too close, Milo's laughter, Elias's steady presence, and his own quiet strength reminded him. He was free. Asher had left behind the house he once shared with Damian. He had sold it, refusing to keep anything that carried the memories of his pain, rejection, and betrayal. Now, he and Milo lived in a cozy home on the outskirts of the city, nothing grand, but filled with warmth and love. His career had blossomed too. With Victoria's help, he had opened his own business, offering consulting services for alpha-beta relationship dynamics, an idea born from his own experiences, from the scars Damian left behind. People sought him out, drawn by his resilience, his story. And for the first time, Asher saw himself not as a victim, but as someone who could help others heal. But today, there were no clients, no work. Just him, his son, and Elias. And today was special. Milo sprinted into the house, his curly hair bouncing with every step. Daddy. Look. He held up a small bouquet of wildflowers, a bright smile on his face. They're beautiful, Bud, Asher said, crouching down to accept them. Where'd you get them? Elias showed me. He said today is important. Asher turned, heart stuttering as Elias stepped into the house, carrying a small wrapped box. Elias had been there through everything. Never rushing, never pushing, just waiting. His patience, his kindness, his unwavering presence had been the foundation Asher needed to rebuild. Elias smiled, a bit nervous. I was going to wait until later, but, he sighed, stepping closer. Asher, I love you. I have from the moment I saw you fighting so hard to be okay. And I know you've spent so long thinking love is something painful, something you have to earn. But it's not. It's just here. Waiting for you. Asher's throat tightened. Love. Real love. Love that didn't demand. Love that didn't hurt. I don't expect you to answer right away, Elias said, handing him the small box. But if you're ready, I'd like to build a future with you. With Milo. With us. Asher's fingers trembled as he opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring. Nothing grand, no flashy diamonds. Just something honest. A deep breath. A choice. And this time, he wasn't afraid to make it. Asher lifted his gaze, met Elias's warm, steady eyes, and smiled. I'm ready. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching Milo chase fireflies. Laughter. Peace. Love. Asher exhaled slowly, letting it all sink in. Once, he had believed he was unworthy. That love was something he had to beg for. That happiness was a fleeting dream, always slipping through his fingers. But now he was loved freely. And for the first time in years, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be.